All right, guys, so this is lesson 31, and we're going to work with rational expressions and complex fractions, okay? So the first thing we need to remind ourselves is that if you have this fraction right here, x plus 4 over x, these x's cannot cancel. And the reason is because you have three people in this picture. Person, 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 three terms. And in order to cancel the x's, you have to, all three of those have to have an x in them. You have to pull the x out of all of them. And you can't do that, so you can't reduce it, okay? If you look at this guy, you guys, the x is stuck to the 4. The x is stuck to the 4. I have exactly x plus 4 on the top, exactly x plus 4 on the bottom, so those do reduce, and my answer is a 3. Okay? All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to factor everything. We're going to list our restrictions, and then cancel what we'll cancel. Okay? So if you look at question A, there's nothing to factor. This is just a monomial over a monomial. So when you're listing restrictions, you look at the bottom and you set the bottom equal to 0. Okay, so if I did this, guys, if I went 30x y to the 5th equals 0, well, the 30 could be a 0, the x could be a 0, or the y to the 5th could be a 0. Well, 30 is not a 0, so that doesn't give me a restriction. I do have a restriction, though, that x can't be a 0. Okay, I also have a restriction that y to the 5th can't be a 0, which means y can't be 0. So those are restrictions. Hi, Hen. I'm just recording the lesson for tomorrow. How can I help you, Hen?
So I was looking for, was the extra credit review the only thing that?
Yes, there's not a regular review. Yeah, it's just extra credit. Are you okay, sweetie?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm reducing 42 and 30, and I can tell they're both even. Okay, so 2 goes into 42 21 times, 2 goes into 30 15 times. Now that will reduce again. So 3 goes into 21 7 times, 3 goes into 15 5 times. Okay, so it's totally okay to do it like that. Another thing you could do is you could look at the 42 and the 30 and you could say 6 goes into both of them. 6 goes into 42 7 times, 6 goes into 35 times. So you can reduce multiple times like I did, or if you can see the 6, then that's great. Look at the x's. Now, the x is free to be canceled because it's not added to anything. Okay, same thing down here. So you've got 3 x's on the top and 1 on the bottom. That leaves you 2 x's on the top. Look at the y's. 2 on top, 5 on bottom. I have more on bottom. How many more? 5 more. That's my answer. Okay, I want you to compare what we just did to this. Okay, you don't have to write this down. You can just watch. Do you see how these are added? Or even if they were subtracted, then that would be one thing, stuck together, can't cancel unless they're identical. But the fact that these are all just multiplied together allows you to cancel them freely. Okay, look at question B. So the nice thing is this thing is all factored up. Okay, let's go ahead and start with restrictions before we cancel. All you have to do is set that, each of those equal to 0. So if you set x squared equals 0, that means x can't be 0. Set x plus 3 equal to 0, that means x can't be negative 3. Set x minus 2 equal to 0, that means x can't be a 2. 2x plus 1 equal to 0, the 1 comes over and becomes a negative, and then you divide by 2. So those are your restrictions, okay? Now let's cancel. So look here, guys, I have 1x on the top and 2x on the bottom. So this x here will cancel with one of those, so I still have 1 on the bottom, okay? Look at the x plus 3's. I've got 1x plus 3 on top and 2 of them down there, so this guy will cancel and make them 1 right there. Okay, look at the x minus 2's. 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. So the 1 on the bottom goes away, and that leaves 1 more on the top. And then the top has a 2x minus 1, the bottom has a 2x plus 1. Those are not going to cancel. So what you have left is x minus 2 times 2x minus 1 over x times x plus 3 times 2x plus 1, and you can leave your answer just like that. Okay? Okay, question 3, or C. Step 1, factor. Okay, so the x is second is going to go to an x and an x. Signs are the same, they're both negative. 6 and 2 multiply to give me 12 and add to give me 8. Factor the bottom, x and x. 12 is going to go to 6 and 2, because 6 and 2 multiply to give me 12 and subtract to give me 4. The biggest is a negative. Okay, once you factor, do the restrictions. Remember, restrictions come from the bottom. So x cannot be equal to, set x plus 2 equal to 0, I get a negative 2. X minus 6 equal to 0, I get a 6. So those are my restrictions. Then as far as canceling goes, I have an x minus 6 on the top, I have an x minus 6 on the bottom. Those cancel out. So my answer is x minus 2 over x plus 2, and I'm done. I can't cancel the x's, I can't cancel the 2's, because the x is stuck to the negative 2, this x is stuck to the plus 2, and so I can't cancel anything. It would be rude if I canceled anything. Okay, there's a line for restrictions, but I already wrote it up above. Okay, so this is totally good. Alright, maybe if I can get this thing to load. Okay, I think what I'm going to do, instead of starting to re-record, I'm just going to write the problem down. So you can look at your workbook and you've got the problems right there, and I'm going to write it because I don't want to have to start re-recording. All right, so the last one I did was question C. Okay, great. So now we're going to go question 2A. Okay, and like I said, I'm just going to write these down. Okay, so 2A, I've got 2 over 15 multiplied by 5 over 8. Okay, so nothing will factor because they're all just numbers. And then restrictions, I don't have any kind of x's on the bottom, so my restrictions are actually none. Okay, so down here where it says restrictions, just add in the word none. Okay, now there's 2 ways to do this. Okay, one way is this. When you multiply, you just go straight across. 5 times 2 is 10, 15 times 8, if you grab your calculator and you punch in 15 times 8, you get 120. Now, you can tell that that's going to reduce. Okay, so this is what you're going to do. You're going to go 10 divided by 120. Then you're going to go second. Move to the right 1 button from the second. You're at DRG. Go down 1 button, it's PRB. Hit that button and then hit enter, and it reduces it for you. So that answer is 1 over 12. That's one way to do it. 10 goes into 10 once, 10 goes in 120 12 times, and it's good. Okay. Another way you can do this, just so you guys know, you can do this. When you're multiplying fractions, before you multiply straight across, you can also cancel around. So look, 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 8 4 times, 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 15 3 times. On the top, 1 times 1 is 1. On the bottom, 3 times 4 is 12. And that's my answer. Okay? Okay, here's question 2B. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to factor. Okay? But nothing factors because they're all just monomials. So there's no factoring. Now I'm going to do restrictions. Set this equal to 0, this, everything equal to 0. So as far as restrictions, 4 is not going to be a 0. Z can't be 0. 27 isn't going to give you a restriction. X on the bottom tells you X can't be 0. Y on the bottom tells you Y can't be 0. So those are your restrictions, okay? Many ways to do this. I'm just going to multiply them together. So I'm going to go 3 times 2 is 6. You have an x, you have a y to the third, and you have a z to the second. On the bottom, 27 times 4 is 108. Then you have an x, a y, and a z. Okay. Let's see if 6 goes into 108. It does. So 6 goes into 6 once. 6 goes into 108 18 times. So on the bottom, you have an 18. You have 1x on the top, 1x on the bottom. Those go away perfectly. 3 z's on the top, 1 z on the bottom. That leaves me with 2 z's on the top. Y's, pardon me. 3 y's and 1 y leaves me 2 y's. And then z's, 2 z's over 1 z. That leaves me 1 z. There's my answer. That's it. Okay? Okay, here's question 2C. Okay, so here's your problem. Okay, first step, factor. Okay, 4x does not factor. This guy right here, I can take out a 6, and I'm left with x minus 3. So I'm replacing that. X minus 3 won't factor. 16x a second won't factor. So it's all factored. Now I'm going to list restrictions. Okay, the 6 is not going to give me a restriction. The x minus 3 gives me an x cannot be 3. The 16 is not going to give me a restriction. The x squared is going to give me a restriction of 0. Those are your restrictions. Okay, now lots of different ways you can do this. I think I'm just going to clean it up a little. So the top is a 4x times x minus 3. On the bottom, you have 16 times 6, which is 96. You have an x to the second, and you have an x minus 3. Okay, so this x minus 3 is going to cancel with that x minus 3. This x to the first is going to cancel with that x to the second. So this guy goes completely away, and that leaves you with 1 right there. Okay, now let's see if 4 goes into 96. It does. So 4 goes into 4 once, 4 goes into 96 24 times. So on the top, there's nothing there. On the bottom, you have a 24 and an x. Lots of people will say that the answer is 24x. That's false, because the 24x is on the bottom, so there's nothing left on the top, so it's really a 1. So your answer is 1 over 24x, and that's it. Okay? All right, now we're going to do question 2D. Okay, so here's your problem. Sorry, I'm having to write these down. Okay, so on all these problems, you guys, the first step you have to take is to factor. Okay, so top left, take out an x, and I'm left with x minus 3. What I usually do is then cross that out so I don't get confused. The bottom is the difference of squares. That factors to x plus 5 times x minus 5. Get rid of what was there before. Top right factors to x and x. The 5 goes to 5 and 1. Signs are different. Biggest is a positive. So the 5 is a positive. The 1 is the negative. Factor here, x and x. Signs are the same. They're both negative. 3 and 1 multiply to give me 3 and add to give me 4. That's gone. Okay, now I'm going to see what I can cancel. So I have an x minus 1 here and an x minus 1 there. I have an x minus 3 there and an x minus 3 there. All that matters is I have 1 on the top and 1 on the bottom. Those can go away. So this x plus 5 here cancels with that x plus 5 there. So what I have left on the top is an x. What I have left on the bottom is an x minus 5. The x's can't cancel because it would be root to the 5. So that's my answer, and I'm done. Now, I forgot to do restrictions. I just remembered right now I forgot to do restrictions. So sometimes what happens, you guys, is people will look at the answer and they say x cannot be 5. Okay, that's true. But 5, x minus 5, was not the only thing in the denominator. Look at all these things in the denominator. Here, sorry, I'm trying to highlight. Here, 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 and here. So those are all restrictions, okay? So the x plus 5 tells me that x cannot be a negative 5. The x minus 5 gives me the 5. The x minus 1 gives me a 1. The x minus 3 gives me a plus 3. Those are my restrictions, and I'm done. Okay? All right, you guys, question 2E. So listen what we're going to do. Factor, 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 factor. List your restrictions, cancel, and write your answer. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. Okay, top left, I've got x squared minus 9. That's going to factor to x plus 3 times x minus 3. Get rid of the x squared minus 9. This one right here, it's going to factor to x and x. The 4 is going to split to, or the 12 is going to split to a 4 and a 3. Signs are different. Biggest is the positive. So the 12 is a positive, 3 is a negative. Get rid of that. X plus 2 doesn't factor. The bottom goes to x and x. Signs are the same. They're both positive. 3 and 1 multiply to give me 3 and add to give me 4. I'm going to do restrictions. What can x not be equal to? The minus 3 gives me a 3. The plus 4 gives me a minus 4. The plus 1 gives me a minus 1. And the plus 3 gives me a minus 3. So those are my restrictions. Okay? 2 seconds, my mic just went out. Okay, now I'm going to cancel what I can. Okay, so I have an x minus 3 and an x minus 3. I have an x plus 3 and an x plus 3, and that's it. So my answer is going to be an x plus 2 on the top. On the bottom, I have an x plus 4 and an x plus 1 that are multiplied together. That's my answer, and I'm done. Okay, let's do question 2F. Factor, 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 factor. Cancel, and then reduce. Okay, so 2 seconds while I write this up. Okay, x squared minus 4 factors to x plus 2 times x minus 2. Get rid of it. X minus 4 doesn't factor. The next one goes to x and x. The 8 is going to go to a 4 and a 2. Signs are different. Biggest is the negative. Looks like that. This right here, I can take out a 2 and I can take out an x. When I do, I'm left with x minus 2. So this x minus 2 cancels with this x minus 2. X minus 4 with this x minus 4. Now look here, guys. I have an x plus 2 here and an x plus 2 here, but they're both on the top, so I cannot do that. I cannot cancel those. So I could write it as x plus 2 times x plus 2. I could write it as x plus 2 squared. On the bottom, I still have a 2x, and that's my answer. And once again, I forgot restrictions. I did it accidentally. It's okay. You could do it at the end. You just have to be careful. So this minus 4 right here is going to give me a restriction of 4. The 2 gives me no restriction. The x gives me a restriction of 0, and this x minus 2 gives me a restriction of 2, and there we go. Okay? All right, now we're going to divide. So dividing, you guys, is almost exactly the same as multiplying, except you have to change the division to a multiplication and flip the second guy upside down. Okay, so here's 3a. 1/2 divided by 3/10. Okay, so if you look on page 137, it gives you a list of steps, and step number 1 is to factor. So factor, 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 factor. Nothing to do. List restrictions. I actually don't list restrictions until I flip it, so I actually think those steps should be out of order, in the opposite order. So I'm going to write that as 1/2. The division goes to a multiplication. 3 over 10 flips upside down to 10 over 3. Make sure you flip the second one upside down and not the first one. Now, restrictions, I don't even have any x's in my whole problem, so I'm not going to have any restrictions. On the top, 1 times 10 is 10. On the bottom, 3 times 2 is 6. I know 2 goes into both of those. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 2 goes into 6 3 times. That's my answer. No restrictions. Okay? Here is, oh, what did I do? I don't know why I wrote 1/2 plus 3/10. Oh, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I was looking back at question 2. Okay, I'm good. Here's question B. This is 3B. Okay, so here's your problem. Factor, 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 factor. Nothing to factor because they're all monomials, one term, so there's nothing to factor. I flip and then list restrictions, okay? So I'm going to leave my first fraction the way it is, make it a division, flip the second guy upside down. So it looks like that, okay? Now, restrictions. You have to be careful on restrictions on the division. So these are restrictions, these are restrictions. The 4 gives me nothing. The z tells me z can't be 0. The 21 gives me nothing. The x tells me x can't be 0. The y squared equal to 0 means y can't be 0. But look at the step up above. We had an 8z in the denominator as well. The 8 gives me nothing. The z tells me z can't be 0. Well, I already had z can't be 0. So it ended up working out okay even if I had forgotten, and that's because I have a z down here. But just know, of the one that you flip upside down, restrictions come from both the top and the bottom, because here the z was on the bottom, it ends up being on the top, and that is a restriction as well. So both top and bottom are restrictions, okay? Okay, I'm going to multiply those together. 8 times 7 is 56, x to the second, y to the third. On the bottom, 21 times 4 is 84, x, y to the second times z. Okay, now let's do that little trick I taught you on your calculator. So everybody go 56 divided by 84. Then hit second. Diagonal from that is a PRB button. Hit that, hit enter, and it reduces it. So on the top you have a 2, on the bottom you have a 3. Look at your x's. 2 on top, 1 on bottom, that leaves you 1 on the top. Look at your y's. 3 on top, 2 on bottom, that leaves you 1 on the top. The z's, you have 1 on the bottom, and that's your answer. Okay? All right, question C. This is 3C. So, here's your problem. Factor everything, okay? 5xy doesn't factor. X minus 2 doesn't factor. 10y doesn't factor. X squared minus 4 factors to x plus 2 times x minus 2. Get rid of what's there before. This guy doesn't factor. Okay, this is just a little tricky. The one that you flip upside down is the one that's right after the division sign. Just that guy. Okay, so the first fraction doesn't change. The second fraction, this symbol becomes a multiplication. You flip that guy upside down. X plus 2 times x minus 2 over 10y. I'm going to add parentheses right there. You do not flip the 3 over x plus 2 upside down because it didn't have a division in front of it. Okay, I'm going to add parentheses. If it's a binomial, I'm putting parentheses around it so I don't mess up. Restrictions. The x minus 2 gives me a positive 2 restriction. This 10y gives me a restriction that y can't be 0. This x plus 2 gives me a restriction that x cannot be 2. But remember, on this guy right here that I flipped upside down, I have to include the top and the bottom. So I got the y, can't be 0. This gives me a negative 2, this gives me a positive 2, I'm good. I already had it. Okay, now let's cancel. X minus 2, x minus 2. All that matters is that one of the things is on the top and one is on the bottom. X plus 2, x plus 2. What I prefer to do here is to kind of clean it up. So just get it together and then see if I can reduce more. 5 times 3 is 15. You have an x, you have a y. On the bottom, you have a 10y. So on the top, 5 goes into 15 3 times. 5 goes into 10 2 times. So on the top you have a 3. On the bottom you have a 2. This y is free to cancel with that one. You still have an x on the top, and I'm done. That's it. Okay? That was 3C. 2 more. 3D. Give me 1 second to write this all down. Okay, factor, 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 factor. Okay, so the first one goes to 2x and a plain x. The 3 is going to split to a 3 and a 1. Look how I know this works. This gives me a 6 and a 1, and that subtracts to give me 5. So it totally works. The biggest should be the plus, so the 6 is the plus, and the 1 is a minus, and it looks like that. And like I said, get rid of what you had before so you don't get confused. 4x squared minus 1. That goes to 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. Looks like that. Top right goes to x and x. The 12 goes to a 4 and a 3. Signs are different. Biggest is a negative. Looks like that. This one, take out a 2, and you're left with x to the second minus 4. Now you're still not done, because x to the second minus 4 is x plus 2 times x minus 2, like that. Okay, so the first fraction is 2x minus 1 times x plus 3. On the bottom, you have 2x plus 1 times 2x minus 1. Change the division to multiplication, flip it upside down. So it's 2 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. The top comes down, and that's x plus 3 times x minus 4. Okay, now I'm going to read restrictions. 2x minus 1 gives me a restriction of negative 1/2. 2x minus 1 gives me a restriction of positive 1/2. X plus 3 gives me a restriction of negative 3. X minus 4 gives me a restriction of positive 4. I have more restrictions because this is the guy that I flipped upside down, so the top and the bottom are restrictions, again, because the top was really the bottom before, right? So the 2 gives me nothing, the plus 2 gives me a minus 2, the minus 2 gives me a plus 2, and there are my restrictions, okay? So now I'm going to cancel. So look what I've got. I've got 2x minus 1, 2x minus 1. I've got x plus 3, and that's all I've got. So on the top, I have 2 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. On the bottom, I have 2x plus 1 times x minus 4, and I'm done. Okay, that was D. Here is E, and we're done. Okay, so factor, restrictions, flip, cancel, write your answer. That's what you do. Okay, so here's your problem. First one won't factor. Bottom one factors to x plus 3 times x minus 3. This factors to x and x. Signs are the same, they're both negative. 4 and 4 multiply to give me 16 and add to give me 8. That guy's gone. This guy won't cancel. Factor. Restrictions. The x plus 3, actually I'm not going to do restrictions until I flip. You can flip and, you can do it the other way. I just like to do restrictions after because the one I multiply, the one I flip upside down, I have to do top and bottom. So I like to do it after. Flip the second fraction, 2x to the second y times x minus 4 times x minus 4. I'm not going to write that as x minus 4 squared because maybe one of them will cancel and the other one won't, and I think it's easier to just write it like that. Okay, x plus 3 gives me a restriction of minus 3. X minus 3 gives me a restriction of 3. The minus 4 gives me a plus 4. The minus 4 gives me a plus 4. I don't have to write it twice. There are my restrictions. Okay, now what will cancel? Okay, nothing's going to cancel. Like literally nothing is going to cancel. So that's okay. Sometimes that happens. The x plus 5 is stuck together, so be careful with that. So you have 2x to the second y times x plus 5. On the bottom, you have x plus 3 times x minus 3. In your final answer, you could write it as x minus 4 times x minus 4 or x minus 4 squared, and that's your answer. Okay, that's it.